In the previous section, we began the discussion of project management with particular emphasis on the considerations needed for laboratory automation programs. In this section, we will spend more time looking at the elements that traditionally are part of project management and consider items such as systems integration, standards, the documentation elements that go into a project, scheduling and cost issues, outsourcing, and the methodologies that can be used for conducting project management work. One of the most pressing problems in laboratory systems is that of systems integration. One example is shown on the screen, and that is the desire to connect instrument data systems with either a laboratory information management system or electronic laboratory notebook. This type of integration is important in laboratory work for a number of reasons. Among the benefits of systems integration are things such as ease of use. Our experience with integrated systems, such as office software, graphics design systems, and other applications, has put us in the mindset that integrated systems are easy to work with and provide higher performance than manual operations or working with disconnected programs. Integration would be expected to streamline operations, reducing the number of steps that a person has to take to get a job done. This should reduce the cost of work and relieve people from tedious tasks and let them do work that is more intellectually interesting. We also expect it to help avoid data duplication. Instead of having the same data stored in multiple places and copied from one task to another, it should be in one central repository for information with pointers within the integrated systems to that information. Integrated systems would be expected to not only make it easier to work with data, but to find it as well. One of the benefits of streamlining operations is a reduction of transcription errors. If we have to rely on people to read data from one screen and type it into another, every keystroke becomes an opportunity for error. By omitting this step, the data moves smoothly without the need to manually verify every entry. All of this improves the overall workflow and the movement of lab data between systems. Instead of using people to make connections between systems, both in transferring samples and data, the systems do it automatically. The sum total of all this is more cost-effective and efficient laboratory operations. This is one of the basic purposes of moving from manual to automated systems. It is a major point of laboratory automation. Integration can be approached in different ways, and we'll look at two contrasting examples, both of which look at different ways of doing household wiring. Household wiring is an example of an integrated system, and there are different ways of implementing it. One way is to run all the wires through the walls, position the lamps where we want them, and then make hardwired connections between the lamps and the wiring in the walls. This would yield a functional integrated system. It's also not the kind of system people want. What people want and expect in household wiring is the ability to place items where they want them, and if they'd like, to move them around without having to deal with the wiring at all, or calling an electrician to move the lamp. In order to do this, they need standardized connections between the lamp and other electrical devices and the electrical supply in the house. We're seeing this play out in the shift from wired to wireless computers, telephones, and entertainment systems. The way we achieve that flexible integration in our homes, offices, and almost everywhere else is to use electrical outlets and plugs to make connections between power sources and the device that want to use electricity. Those plugs and outlets are the result of over 200 standards that ensure that those connections can be made. Standards are the basis of the integration that we want to see in our systems. There are very few examples of the types of standards we need in laboratory applications. One common one, at least in life science industries, is a microplate. An example is shown on the screen. This device provides a standardized format for sample cells. The one on the screen holds 96 samples. The geometry of the plate is standardized so that any device designed to work with them knows what to expect. This has led to a variety of instruments, wash systems, and plate handlers that can be used to create an automated sample processing system. This work wouldn't be possible without the use of standards. Integrating a laboratory information management system with electronic laboratory notebooks or instrument data systems are among the most common requests for developing integrated systems. Some vendors are working with their own products or in partnership with other vendors to provide some integration facilities that may be of value to you. The issue you need to face is whether or not their product suites are acceptable to your needs. If that isn't the case, then you're faced with the option of doing integration yourself. When you stray from vendor-provided mechanisms for doing integration, you run the risk of locking yourself into a specific version of a product. You may create an integrated system from a chromatographic data system and a LIMS that works well, but find that it breaks when one of the components is upgraded. At that point, you either have to re-implement the programming changes that were made or start over with a new suite of products. One way to approach the problem of integration with instruments that are not included in the vendor's product set is to use device-independent programming. This is a technique that is widely used successfully in the graphics industry as well as other applications. The idea is to confine all device-specific functions to a small number of subroutines so that any changes in the devices can have minimal impact on programming. In short, instead of scattering the device-dependent code throughout your program, it's localized, and as a result can minimize the impact of changes. Since equipment changes over time are common, planning can have a significant effect on the long-term support and the ability to upgrade and maintain systems. We've put together more extensive information in this report that's available from our website at no charge. Please feel free to download the PDF. The report discusses 3 types of standards that are needed for communications. The first is data transfer between informatics systems. For example, the type of systems we've talked about concerning laboratory information management systems, electronic laboratory notebooks, and chromatographic data systems. Successfully addressing this issue involves both communications and message formatting standards. The second level that needs to be addressed is that between informatics products and instruments, so that the data from measuring devices can be moved into the programs that need to use them. Again, we're talking about message and data format issues. The third level addresses the formatting of instrument data itself so that it can be exported and used in other programming. All these problems are still far from being fully addressed in industrial laboratories. They have been successfully addressed in clinical systems where communications between instruments and informatics systems is routine and supported by standardized protocols and formats. This can be successfully approached. If systems integration between the instrument data systems and laboratory informatics systems is important, you may want to consider carefully how you approach the problem. For example, if your laboratory already has instrumentation and you're looking to incorporate electronic laboratory notebooks, you may want to carefully consider what instruments the notebook supports. If those instruments are not the same as the ones you have in your laboratory, for example, the notebook supports a balance from one vendor and you have another vendor's products, it may be a lot cheaper and a lot easier to change balances than go through the problems of programming and validating a new device. The time of purchase is a point at which you want to seriously address these things with a vendor. They may be interested enough in the sale to make concessions or work with you on integration projects. At this point, we're going to shift subjects and look more at the process that is used in project management and planning. As we've noted in the previous sections, there are basically 4 types of documents that need to be developed: the functional specification, design documents, implementation plan, and the plan for installation and operations. These documents also incorporate elements such as user requirements, hardware specifications, testing programs, and validation programs, as well as others. The first item we will take up is the functional specification. This is where we get into a statement of need, what it is that has to be done, and why. This is also the first element of a validation program. It is a matter of describing in detail the entire scope of the project, not only what it is supposed to do, but how it is supposed to relate to other projects. In addition, you want to prioritize the capabilities or functions of the project, describing which ones are mandatory, which are desirable, and which are optional. You also want to detail the acceptance criteria. Once a project is completed from the developer's point of view, what tasks have to be done before you sign off and agree to the delivery and completion of the project. I'd like to come back to this idea of prioritizing capabilities. Most projects at some point in their life cycle suddenly come against a hard reality of budget limitations or schedule, or both. The initial plan might look quite good, but things happen and plans have to be adjusted. That brings us to the peach. The whole point of the peach is to ensure that the peach pit gets planted and has a chance to germinate. If that doesn't happen, the peach is wasted. Let's let the peach pit represent the functions in your project that absolutely have to be there. If they're not, the project's a failure. The flesh of the peach is there to attract an animal's attention and get it to process the peach and put it in an environment that's conducive to germination. So the flesh is sacrificed to the needs of the pit. In our analogy, the desirable and optional functions are represented by the flesh of the peach. When trade-offs are needed, this is where they come from. So when you determine the capabilities and requirements of your project, you should think in terms of what features you're willing to give up should it become necessary. The optional ones are the first ones to go, and are probably never going to happen. If you really cared about them, they wouldn't be optional. The desirable ones are the ones that we start digging your heels in for, and making some serious decisions about what it is and what is not important. Depending on the scope of the problems you're looking at, you may have to give up some of these, but in doing so, preserve all of the mandatory functions. These trade-offs can occur early in a project when budget and schedules are being negotiated. So preparing these when the functional spec is first drawn up makes a lot of sense. The design document is a response to the statement of need. It describes how the system is being planned, will work, and how it will interface to any other systems. It should also define problem areas, areas where work needs to be done to determine feasibility or overcome potential difficulties. These are places where additional research and development may have to be done and could pose risk to the project. These issues are fairly normal, particularly in complex projects. There are going to be areas where there are unknowns, and they have to be realistically addressed. They will have an impact on budget and schedule. This part of the document will also include listings of parts and systems and software that need to be purchased, and also the criteria for vendor selection. Once the functional specification and design documents have been reviewed and approved, the next major component is the implementation plan. This is a description of the process and resources needed to get the work done, including the funding and personnel. There are a few things that are worth pointing out about the implementation plan, which are elements specific to laboratory automation. The first of these is that the document should contain a response to the key issues that may have been described in the design document. In particular, any elements that require research and development before the plan can be successfully implemented. For each research and development effort, the plan should detail the risks and what the alternative plans are if the initial approach doesn't work. It's possible that in some efforts they become a roadblock and require a redevelopment of the design plan. While this is far from desirable, it can happen, and you should be prepared to deal with it realistically. Both the implementation plan and your plan for putting the project into operation need to make sure they address training requirements. Any new system or upgrade to an existing system is going to have elements that are unfamiliar to lab personnel. This is the place where we need to make sure they are addressed. One approach to dealing with training issues is something that we mentioned earlier, virtualization. By creating a virtualized system of a project, even when it's under development, users can begin to gain some familiarity with the system before it's fully implemented. That means that training and implementation can overlap, which benefits the schedule. And also, any problems that the users see can be addressed earlier. This becomes an informal method of testing the system, but not a substitute for a carefully managed test and evaluation program. Virtualized systems can be used for training people without having them affect the live system. People can access the virtualized software, work with it, make whatever mistakes they can make, and when they're done, it all goes away. This allows people the freedom to experiment without any penalties. It also gives them a basis for building confidence in working with the system. Another set of issues that needs to be looked at are those of money and schedule. For any project that comes up for review and approval, these items are going to have the most scrutiny. Part of the problem is that people doing the review may not understand much of the technical content, but when it comes to these 2 points, they will chime in loudly. They're the things that people can easily identify with. This graphic shows my home and the local shopping mall, an area we visit about once a week. We travel the same route and have a pretty good idea how long it takes. But if I had to be there at a certain time, I'd give it at least half an hour. You never know what you're going to run into. Wild animals, farm equipment, accidents, fairs, races, parades, funerals, or people who like to watch the scenery, or believe that 20 miles an hour is about as fast as anyone needs to go, even if the speed limit is 45 miles an hour. Even things that you do routinely can yield unexpected surprises. So how about things you haven't done before? There are going to be times in projects when things don't go well, when problems crop up and their solution is not clear. When they do, and management becomes aware of them, they usually ask the same question: when will the problem be solved? When the problem first pops up, you have no idea, because knowing when it'll be solved depends upon knowing exactly what the problem is, what the solution is, and how it'll be implemented. When problems occur, non-technical managers in particular will focus on schedules and budget. These are the things they understand, and often the technical details are outside their experience. They also don't like uncertainty. Their concerns are valid since they may consider the project in jeopardy until the problem is solved. How you handle unexpected problems is important for at least two reasons. First, because of the project itself. You want the project to continue, and you don't want to have misinformation cause it to be canceled. The second reason is because while people are evaluating the details, they're also evaluating you and how you handle yourself. The key points are fairly simple. Have confidence in yourself, play it straight, and don't bluff. Have a plan on how you can address the issue, including the time when you can report back and give a status update. This is where your interpersonal skills become very important. You have to acknowledge their concerns, and if you can't answer their questions immediately, tell them when you can. If they have confidence in you, they'll have confidence in the project. Home and Garden TV has a number of shows that focus on home renovations. Many of them can be very interesting, and from the standpoint of project management, they are useful to watch. If you want to get an idea how strange things can get, and what kind of surprises can pop up, and how they are handled, watch some of these shows. It can be an education. The point is that even the best laid plans can have surprises that affect both scheduling and budget. You need to plan for them, building contingencies in both time and funding to allow you to deal with surprises without having to go back to management and ask for additional resources because something happened that you didn't plan on. Expect things to go wrong and be prepared to deal with it. You are going to have to address development schedules. If you ask people to give an estimate for the amount of time it's going to take to accomplish a certain task, they'll probably give you a number that's fairly ambitious. This is normal. People try to impress others with how quickly they can get things done, overestimate their capabilities, and assume 100% efficiency. None of that ever happens. Whatever number they give you, double it. That doesn't mean you don't trust them, but it does mean that you need to be realistic about expectations. People get sick, take vacations, quit, or for other reasons, don't work up to the potential they thought they might. There is one thing you need to be careful of, and that is padding the time schedule too much. I'm aware of one case where a request was made for a time estimate to carry out a piece of software development. And as noted, the person who received the estimate doubled it. And the person they gave it to doubled it, to the point where the cost of the project was well beyond reason and wasn't funded. Make sure the people you're giving estimates to understand how you arrived at those estimates and don't inflate them just to protect themselves. If you are doing something you haven't done before, making a time estimate is very difficult. If you look up strategies for doing estimates, you'll find all kinds of approaches. One is to break the project down into a series of milestones and make estimates for each one. At each milestone, evaluate the performance against what was expected and use it as a basis to make adjustments to the rest of the schedule. Continue doing this throughout the project. This will avoid surprises, and people do not like surprises when it comes to projects, unless it means coming in early and under budget. By carrying out this simple exercise, you show that you're on top of the project and being realistic about getting things done. Project management is a matter of balancing capability, cost, schedule, and people. It's both process and resource management. Cost and schedule are loosely coupled. Not every change in schedule involves a cost, and sometimes costs may change without affecting schedules, but for the most part one will affect the other. Keep in mind that stuff happens, uncontrolled, unpredictable, and basically that's life in reality. There have been cases, quite a number of them, where things have gone really badly wrong. The best documented case is an FBI situation where the FBI wanted to implement a laboratory information management system. The system was analyzed by a government accounting office and its documentation is online. The bottom line is fairly simple. The system was never installed, and the Bureau lost over $1 million on the project. The culprit was poor planning and poor management. Some of this information is fairly old, but it still seems to hold up well. One report is that 60% of laboratory information management systems and implementations fail on the first attempt. It doesn't detail the extent of failure, but basically something didn't work. That isn't too surprising with complex systems. Basically stuff happens, and that's what a good test and evaluation plan is intended to find and correct. A more complete report was done in 1995 and shows that enterprise resource planning systems have a high failure rate. ERP systems are similar in scope and complexity to LIMS, and as you can see from the screen, over half had to be canceled, and over 52% almost double their original cost estimate. Project management is an art, not a science. If you do searches on the internet, you'll find many other examples of cases where problems have occurred. You simply don't want to become one of them. The installation operations portion of the project documentation deals with the elements that are shown on the screen. They should detail the results of any acceptance testing, indicating where work needs to be done and how it was accomplished to both the user's satisfaction and to meet the initial criteria that was set up early in the program. The documents should also detail the process needed to install the project and how it can be tested to show that the installation was done properly. The next section looks at putting the system in operation, what training is necessary, and any testing of both people and equipment, the final acceptance for operational use, and how the project is going to be phased in, and the transition that will take place between how things are being done now and how things were done with the new system. This last point is something you really need to pay attention to. It's not just a matter of putting a new system into operation, but how do you transition between one way of doing work and another? For example, suppose you're replacing a manual process with an electronic one. Perhaps you've implemented an electronic laboratory notebook for keeping track of data and experiments. At one point, the paper notebook was a place where people were entering data, making notes, doing analysis, and recording all the experimental work on paper. Now they are going to transition to an electronic format. How does the old data and the new data get linked together? How do you refer to old work in the new system? How do you manage the fact that data may exist in two places? Which has precedence? And if a discrepancy exists, how do you determine which one is the correct system? The more complex the system, the more difficult it is to phase in. The changeover isn't going to be like throwing a switch. People need time to make adjustments and manage the simple fact that people are going to be resistant to change, nervous about it, and make mistakes. Beyond those points, the support plan needs to be detailed, and any recommendations for how future upgrade can be performed need to be noted. This last point should address any special concerns about programming, product availability, how things were done, and who might have special knowledge that is critical to the system and its success. This information will be useful to whoever takes over the project next, and remember, it still might be you. Project management is really the management of a process designed to meet an objective. An effective project management program builds confidence into the lab's work and will generate any information you need to meet validation requirements. The next item we will look at is that of outsourcing, a practice that is becoming increasingly popular because it minimizes corporate outlays and leverages expertise in outside companies. As we noted in the first part of the course, outsourcing support for various aspects of laboratory work is done with a mix of either external resources, meaning outside companies, centralized internal resources, for example an IT support group, or completely decentralized efforts where each group has its own support services. Outsourcing can provide your company with a range of options that might not be able to afford otherwise. Among those options are the ability to reduce operating costs by avoiding the need to buy highly specialized equipment and instrumentation that may not be of use on a routine basis. This also allows the lab to use techniques that require specialized training that are beyond the capabilities of in-house personnel. Outsourcing can also be used as a means of cross-checking results and handling a surge in sample volume instead of going off and hiring people on a permanent basis and providing equipment necessary to support them. This can also be used as a temporary solution if it appears that an increased sample testing program is going to go on for an extended period of time. Outsourced organizations can also be used to develop new test procedures and also automated systems to carry out procedures that are beyond the capability of in-house lab staff. There was a point in time when companies thought the use of outsourcing systems development would relieve them of the necessary work required for full validation. This is not the case. The FDA has determined that an outsourced facility should be treated as a virtual extension of the laboratory, and all regulations requirements are extended to it. We're going to look at the considerations in outsourcing laboratory testing and the design of methods and automated systems. We have to recall that the driving issue is maintaining the quality and integrity of the data your lab works with and then supplies to other departments. We'll begin by looking at outsourcing of testing work. The basic problem we have to look at is that you are hiring an outside company to do work for you whose results are going to be passed on to other groups and reviewed as your work. Among the concerns that need to be looked at are those shown on the screen. Does the company have experience with the types of materials and test methods they'll be expected to work with? If not, how will they be trained? How will you ensure confidentiality of the test methods and the results of the work? Will they want to publicize the fact that they are doing work for you to build up their reputation? What procedures will be put in place to check the quality of their work? How will discrepancies be addressed? What validation protocol will be used to support the outsourcing program? This is a process, and like any process, there need to be checks put in place to make sure it is implemented properly and working. In addition, when you choose a company, you need to carefully evaluate them. In effect, do a vendor audit to ensure that they are capable and have the reputation for doing the kind of work that you need to have done. Because it's not just their reputation that is on the line, it's yours as well. Unless the vendor is working with exactly the same systems, including versions, that you are, it may be difficult to exchange data files and reevaluate results for a particular sample. In your own laboratory, you can look back at the data files and see if there's anything peculiar about the numbers or the test data that may not be possible with outsourced testing. Even if printed information is provided, you may have to resort to manual calculations based on the printed information to recheck calculations and results. When you're negotiating the initial contract with a vendor, you should specify that you want the contractor to maintain data in electronic form on their systems and to provide you with a backup copy for your own use. The backup copy may not be of any value directly unless you have the same systems they have, but it will provide you with something to send back to them in case they lose the data or purge it from their systems. Your contract should also specify all the data that you expect reported from each sample. This should include any instrument data, basically anything you need to verify or recheck sample results. You also need to consider that with data life cycles being decades, you can't be sure that the contractor will be in business over that period of time. The contract should be written to protect you in case they go out of business. Any information that they may keep as proprietary should be made available once it decides to dissolve their operations. You need to take steps to make sure that any data provided to you is supportable and can stand up to challenge should that become necessary. Now we will turn our attention to test method development. As noted earlier, all regulatory issues, including validation, apply to the work the contractor does for you. Your contract should specify who owns the test method, who has publication rights, and whether or not the details of the test method can be disclosed without your permission or used without your permission. Contractors often undertake projects with the idea of using the results as a product or service. You're paying for it. You need to protect your intellectual property. Incorporating the test method into your laboratory's workflow will require training. Who will provide it? And will the method's documentation be thorough enough that it could be used to train new personnel without the vendor's involvement? If the vendor develops a test method using instrumentation that is similar to what you have but different, will those differences affect the results of the test? There may be issues about sensitivity, instrument quality, or other issues that have to be evaluated. Part of the acceptance of the test method should be a side-by-side comparison of samples run in their facility as well as done in your own using your own equipment. A systematic difference should be addressed and reconciled. Realize that if the vendor's equipment has some significant advantage over that which you have in your laboratory, the cost of implementation may include the purchase of new hardware. It might be simpler and less expensive to do that than to adjust the method. You also have to factor in the fact that this new protocol is going to impact your laboratory information management systems or electronic laboratory notebooks. Adjustments may have to be made to databases to incorporate new test elements in any supporting fields that they require. The cost of doing this should be factored into the overall project cost. The contracting vendor may provide some assistance on what is necessary. If the new method requires the development of hardware or software, or modifications to an instrument, are the rights transferable to you? You don't want to be in a position where every time you upgrade or modify a system, you have to pay the vendor a royalty. You should have as thorough documentation as possible on any of these types of system changes because the vendor's personnel may not be available the next time you need them. If equipment is being modified, is the actual equipment being used yours, or do you have to purchase duplicate pieces of hardware and re-implement the modifications? Does the company have plans to convert the work you paid for into a product? And should your company gain any financial considerations from the investment that you've made? We are asking a lot of questions. The answers are something you and your company's legal staffs are going to have to address. It isn't so much that there are a set of right answers to draw on, but rather issues you need to consider in planning work. Whether the project is a completely new development or modification to an existing system, both of those share some common elements. There are three driving factors that you have to consider. Your lab is responsible for the work, we've noted this before, and within the regulatory environment, and just for practical purposes, regardless of who does the work, the responsibility for its quality and integrity fall on your shoulders. You need to ensure the integrity of any data processed resulting from the system, and you have to protect your lab against the possibility that the contractor may go out of business or lose key people after the project is completed. While outsourcing is a very common practice, you have to make sure that your lab can function and improve upon the system without benefit of the contractor. Even the loss of a single key individual can put you effectively in that position. The development requirements include the elements we covered earlier, including project plan, functional specification, design document, and two things we haven't stressed as yet: fully documented source code listings and user manuals. You can't assume that the vendor is always going to be able to assist you in the future. The company may have been in business for quite a while and have a good reputation. Their ability to support you depends not on their history, but on the people that are available to work with you, and that is something the vendor has no control over. You have to have enough documentation so that someone can come to the project and figure out what has to be done, and how to make changes that might be required. User manuals are needed to train people new to the system, or to answer questions about the system's operations. You can't always assume that the vendor will be there to support you. Documentation is one thing developers really don't like to do, but until the paperwork is complete, the project isn't finished. Thorough documentation can impact the cost of the project, but will save you money in the long run. If the vendor considers code a proprietary product, ask to have a copy put in escrow accounts to protect yourself against the vendor either going out of business or being purchased by another company. Managing outsourced projects is a mix of managerial and technical issues. The situation can be made much simpler by establishing corporate policies and practices that cover both in-house work as well as that work that is outsourced. This provides a clear set of rules that everyone has to follow when work is being done. It makes it easier to present a corporate policy to a vendor and ask them to follow them in your projects than have them feel that the rules are being made up for them and might be negotiable. Most of the discussions so far have assumed a traditional project management methodology. However, There are other approaches, and we'll briefly take a look at one of them, referred to as Agile Project Management. One statement you'll often hear in discussions about project management is that in the Apollo program, the technology that was used to land on the moon was 10 years old when the vehicle touched down on the moon's surface. Some people put the reason for that as inflexible project management. However, a more realistic view would say that constant changes would adversely affect the vendors and contractors working on the project and could delay its completion. Power systems, for example, that are designed for one type of control system might have to be redesigned for an improved technology. This could have ramifications throughout the system. Agile project management, which can be used successfully in some projects, is an alternative approach to traditional methodologies and allows for changes to occur even in late stages of development. Whether or not it's suitable for you is something you'll have to determine. The list of resources you see on the screen are just a sampling of the material that's available to describe Agile project management. A simple internet search will bring you more updated material. LinkedIn provides a forum for project management discussions and is worth getting involved with. Agile software development refers to a group of software methodologies based on an interim process where requirements and solutions evolve through collaboration. The term was coined in 2001 when the Agile Manifesto was formulated, in part a response to the rigidity found in traditional project management approaches. Agile methods promote a disciplined project management process that encourages frequent inspection and adaptation, and leadership qualities that encourages teamwork, self-organization, and accountability, engineering best practices for the rapid development of high-quality software, and a business approach that aligns development with customer needs and corporate goals. This is a methodology that requires good leadership skills and maturity. Some of the principles behind this methodology include continuous delivery of useful software, where software is delivered in weeks rather than monthly updates. This means that people see the results of what's been going on much faster. It also means that they may see changes faster than they can absorb them or evaluate them in the course of their normal work. Late changes in requirements are welcomed. This requires very close cooperation between the people providing the functional specifications and those doing development. It can also be a source of problems if some changes require reworking of basic elements of the project software. The system also permits adaptation to changing circumstances. This type of system may be best applied to product management work rather than laboratory automation systems in user organizations. The requirement for close cooperation and frequent meetings to discuss changes and developments may not work because of their impact on your standard workload. If you decide to adopt this approach, there are some things to consider. Always test proposed changes against the original project assumptions or requirements. If a change is requested, you have to be very careful that some critical fundamental element isn't compromised. If the system is structured properly, things such as changes in equipment models within a product family may not matter very much, but substituting one vendor's data management system for another could easily knock the project back to square one. Another issue that needs to be considered is whether or not your team's method of work, your corporate culture, is compatible with Agile methodology. Will frequent changes in requirements cause frustrations with management and their concerns over budget and cost? Will it appear that the project is out of control? Will the users of the project become concerned about the need to evaluate rapidly developing software and provide input? And will they feel that the project is out of control if things seem to be changing a lot and they are not clear as to why the changes are necessary? This methodology requires frequent communications and close cooperations. Will that work in your work environment? In an earlier slide, we mentioned some cases where things went wrong. Now we'll take a look at some of the reasons why. The list of items on the screen are some of the key reasons why projects fail. The top three are the most frequently cited. There should not be any surprise that these contribute to project failure. However, I do want to point out something about the third bullet. Scope creep. If you're not familiar with the term, these are changes in the project definition as project progresses. People discover they want something new added, modified, or a significant change to what has been agreed to. This is exactly a capability that Agile project management brings to the table. As a result, the methodology should be carefully considered before engaging in it. In addition, the FDA has pointed out that the biggest problem in systems validation occur when changes are made to a project late in the life cycle. The methodology that works well for product development may not be well suited for working laboratory systems. The remainder of the bullets are for the most part self-explanatory and shouldn't surprise anyone. Business politics is always an issue. Avoiding it requires a well-disciplined team working together with frequent communications to prevent it from becoming destructive. There may be cases where a particular individual tries to use politics for personal advantage, and you may have to consider whether or not they are really appropriate for the work that's going on. In most projects, the most significant problems are people and interpersonal issues. The reasons projects succeed are the flip side of the items on the previous list. Good, solid planning is essential to success. Most of this, when you see it on the screen, seems like common sense, and yet when it comes to implementation, you have to try hard to make these things work. It's too easy to let something slide and not realize it until problems show themselves. During this course, we've covered a lot of ground. We've touched lightly on the details of project management methodologies and focused on the things that make project management in scientific and laboratory automation projects different. The mix of project management skills plus the material covered here and a strong interpersonal skills, which are essential to being successful, will give you the background necessary to approach projects in laboratory automation and scientific work with confidence and success.